Hello and welcome to all our participants. It is such an honor to host you here today. My name is Senem Zeybekoğlu, a lecturer of architecture and design at Birmingham City University and one of the co-editors of the book Cities Without Capitalism. I want to start with a tribute to our mentor, colleague, and comrade, the foreword writer of this book, Professor Peter Marcusa. Peter and his scholarly and activist work for decades brought hope for all of us who were dreaming the change and a better and more equitable future. His passion, critical ideas, and motivation were always young, radical, and progressive. This book is probably one of his latest scholarly contributions, but his light and his inspiring thoughts will live and evolve with every one of us. The quest for a world freed from capitalism and urbanization with thriving, decapitalized, and deurbanized cities is this book's motivation. The idea of this book emerged during our sabbatical in the City College of New York as invitees of the late urbanist critic and activist, our comrade, Professor Michael Sorkin. Sorkin's essay, Architecture Without Capitalism, featured in Peggy Deemer's book, Architecture and Capitalism, ignited the idea of the title of the book. The project aimed to bring together different disciplines to probe into relationships between urbanization and capitalism, to outline the existent condition of cities, address anti-capitalist and anti-urbanist transitions, and envision progressive alternatives that could shape the future of cities. With this aim in mind, the book is structured under three main sections. The first section of this book is entitled Cities and Capitalism. This section seeks to answer the question of why capitalist urbanization cannot sustain, to expose the inherent conflicts of capitalist urbanization by revealing the unsustainability in the relationship between urbanization and capitalism. The second section of the book is entitled Cities Against Capitalism. The main question in this section is how the alternative habitat practices of today can motivate the transition of capitalist urbanization. This section aims to illustrate current practices and alternative movements for building more autonomous, communal, and ecological human settlements against capitalist urbanization. The third and the last section of the book is entitled Cities Without Capitalism. This section introduces progressive visions related to cities of a post-capitalist era. We are grateful for the contribution of the diverse academics and activists from different disciplines, regions, and generations who built this project. Many of those are here today and will share invaluable contributions with us. Thanks also to Routledge and their professional team. Unfortunately, we heard an incredibly sad news today. We express our sincere sympathy to Porus Olpadwala, Dean Emeritus of the College of Architecture, Art and Planning at Cornell University, author of the first chapter of this book, who lost his wife and could not attend this meeting. He shared his apologies and asked us to read this brief note about his chapter on behalf of him. The question of what cities will look like in a post-capitalist world will be answered only when that world arrives, for we do not know what it will contain. Meanwhile, we can look at capital's essential influence on cities, positive and negative, and decide normatively which elements we would wish to retain and which to discard as the transition takes place. The chapter approaches capitalist urbanizations using Marx's laws of motion that identified key processes and outcomes inherent in capitalist societies. These are the imperative for indefinite consumption and growth, commodification in most aspects of life, economic concentration, technological dynamism, internationalization, the creation simultaneously of employment and unemployment, inequality and regular economic and financial crisis. The argument veers from Marx in deriving these forces separately, using everyday business propositions instead of his labor theory of value. While the result is the same, these contributing forces are more closely and easily demonstrated in the dynamics and forms of capitalist cities. After taking note of scholars who have used this approach, the chapter uses housing as a case study in capitalist urbanization. It tries to show that persistent housing problems of various kinds are inbuilt in capital operations. Their obstinate existence is evidence not of a failure of capital, but that it is functioning as expected. Neglecting systemic forces in analyzing urbanizations, the proverbial monster in the room, in practice results in suggesting remedies on the basis of partial explanations, focusing on transitory panaceas, hiding behind constant calls for more and better information, the setting of urban goals by comparison, and conflating urbanization in development. The chapter ends with the author's personal reactions to growing up in capitalist urban India and visiting Beijing and Shanghai in 1985, when the two still retained considerable socialist features. So this was the brief note from Porus Olpadvala. And thank you very much for joining in today, and welcome again. I'm passing to Hossein Sadri to moderate the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanam, and thanks, Porus, and we share our condolences with him and his family. And welcome again, all the participants and contributors. My name is Hossein Sadri, and I am a senior lecturer in architecture at Coventry University, and one of the co-editors of this book. I would appreciate if all the speakers can introduce themselves before their talk. And I want to invite William Goldsmith to start the session.
Hello, Senem. Hello, Hussein. Congratulations on remarkably pulling this book together so quickly. I want to begin on a very sad personal note. I was for about half a century very close friends with Dinaz Olpadvala, Porus's wife, and I want to offer in public, which I have already done in private, my condolences to Porus, to Sarosh and Rishad, his son, to Julie, Rish's wife, and their children. Dinaz lived a very full and rich life. Her last 4 years were extremely painful after a second stroke, and she is now, we all hope, resting in peace. Porus was probably my closest friend, still is. And next, I want to make another sad but not entirely sad comment. I had the good fortune to get to know Peter Marcusa when he was at Columbia and I was at Cornell. He visited Ithaca more than once and lectured. I sometimes visited New York. We roomed together on a trip to Cuba. We traveled a bit together for conferences in Belgium and Germany and in Brazil, where I took Peter. But best of all for me, Peter and his wife, Fran, moved to Santa Barbara just a year after I did, 4 or 5 years ago. So I got to spend much more time with him. Peter never stopped thinking, never stopped pushing for social change, never stopped questioning the insanities that surround us. He had slowed a bit near the end, but when he tripped and fell, it was the isolations of hospital stay under COVID that made recovery impossible for him. If you've not yet done so, be sure to read the marvelous testimonies to Peter that have been published online in Progressive Planning. And for that, I want to thank Norma Rentisi. In an essay originally published in the 1950s, the English poet and novelist Stephen Spender made brief reference to the United States, where I happen to live. America, he said, the greatest capitalist country, seems to offer no alternatives to war, exploitation, and destruction of the world's resources. Since Spender noted these existential connections, roughly 75 years have passed, and capitalism has bristled with wars, deepened exploitation, and destroyed nature. Our book's title suggests that if we could have cities without capitalism, we would then have less war, less exploitation, and a better climate. In my chapter, I have tried turning the question upside down or inside out. I believe our patterns of urbanization powerfully support capitalism. So if we can improve the way we urbanize, then we might reduce inequality and limit climate change. Parenthetically, my chapter does ignore wars and nuclear attacks with a mere footnote. But that note acknowledges Peter Marcusa, who elsewhere asked, and I quote, "Environmental degradation is a greater danger in the long run than war, fascism, poverty, hunger, or disease?" Well, I think I would agree with Peter, not, but I nonetheless narrow my focus until my very last comment. Let me highlight my main arguments. Most cities in the United States and elsewhere in capitalist social formations, including state capitalist formations, abuse the climate and intensify inequality. Most do not offer quality schools for all children or affordable housing for all residents. Inequitable land uses aggravate climate change. Regulatory failures diminish productivity, and austerity policies deepen social inequalities. Over the last half century, especially, cities and their regions have played a major part in the intensification of inequality, damaging the environment, encouraging overconsumption, and requiring the overuse of fossil fuels. As one critic writes, our cities make it almost impossible to live lightly on Earth. My chapter makes three arguments. One, as part of its program to limit climate change and reduce social inequality, the world needs to make drastic changes to dominant patterns of urbanization. Two, appropriate physical and social changes to city and metropolitan patterns will encounter powerful resistance. And three, the politics, therefore, of urban reform constitutes one of the key challenges of our time, generally unacknowledged. Let me elaborate on these arguments just a tiny bit. One, current patterns of urbanization are not merely problematic, they are literally unsustainable. Badly constructed cities damage the environment, threatening global sustainability. As Barry Commoner so long ago led us to see, the world's processes of urbanization reinforce the tragic sorts of politics, economics, and technology that take us in the wrong directions ecologically and socially. It behooves us to ask how properly planned urbanization might help. Second, more appropriately designed cities can combat global warming. They can better utilize the advantages of density and social cooperation to help restrain overproduction and overconsumption, and to diminish per capita levels of energy and resource use. Third, badly designed cities facilitate inequality, distressing the losers physically and emotionally, burdening political systems, corrupting the winners. Metropolitan regions have increasingly subdivided into distinct residential zones that separate rich from poor, a relatively small number of giant city regions have thrived, further separating rich from poor. Misshapen patterns of urbanization with inequalities, internal and external, feed a politics of austerity, provoking tensions, promoting incivility, ultimately undermining democracy. In many ways, this situation is not sustainable. To finish, and to bring Peter Marcusa back, I ignored war entirely in my chapter. Today, in this world, once again, war is the principal destroyer of cities, equality, and human life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you.
Nice.
May I invite Kanishka and Sinad as the other authors of the first section?
Yes, excuse me. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes, Sinad.
great. So I just wanted to offer some brief reflections in memoriam of Peter Marcusa and his influence within and beyond the field of planning. So I actually had the opportunity to meet Peter when I was working on an exhibition in the spring of 2016 in New York City. And this exhibition grew out of the archive of the Brooklyn-born and Brooklyn-based artist Martha Rosler. So in 1989, Martha did a series of shows addressing the dual concerns of urban homelessness and inadequate housing. And one of the intentions of this project was really to suggest how art communities might take on these issues. So by presenting conflicting representations side by side, which is a tactic that John Berger really artfully demonstrated in his 1972 series, Ways of Seeing, by executing this juxtaposition, it is possible to challenge the simplified images we receive with the social reality we behold. And so this was one of the animating principles behind the exhibition, which was titled If You Lived Here, and resulted in this volume that some of you may have or may recognize, because in addition to the exhibition, there was a series of public forums and discussions with a number of people, including Peter Marcusa, who was an invited speaker in an open forum in that 1989 show. And the title of the forum in which he spoke was Planning, Power, Politics, and People. And I actually revisited that discussion because it's transcribed here in this book. And in his remarks in that discussion, where Marshall Berman was also speaking from the audience, Peter said the problem with New York City at the time was not that there was too little planning, but that there was too much misguided planning. And it turns out that he was also an invited speaker a number of years later in 2016 at this public forum that I had the privilege to work on, and that the topic of that forum was privatization. So as a student of planning and then later geography, I appreciate Peter's articulation of critical urban theory as analysis that flows from the experience of practice in developing the potentials of existing urban society. And critical theory is intended to illuminate and inform the future course of such practice. And in the chapter from this edited volume, co-written with my supervisor, Kanishka, we draw on critical theory and we invoke concepts such as reification, commodification, hegemony, and governmentality to show how the promise of freedom offered by cities is negated by their capitalist form, and to argue for the necessity of struggles within and against the capitalist cities for the actualization of human emancipation. So I'll leave it there and then turn it over to Kanishka.
Thank you, Sinead. And yeah, so thank you, Senem and Hussein, for inviting us, first of all, to contribute to this book. And it was a great honor for me to receive this invitation, because I noticed right away that my own PhD supervisor and advisor and wonderful friend, William Goldsmith, Bill Goldsmith, is also a contributor, along with Poros Solpadwala, and Peter Marcusa, of course, wrote the foreword. So, so I would like to say just a couple of things about Peter, rather than go on about my own, co-authored chapter, which is actually largely Sinead's work, and so Peter, for me, represents the Holy Trinity, of activism, the professionalism of planning, and the intellect. So is the activist, the professional, and the intellect all rolled into one, right? In fact, my first sighting of Peter was at a protest in downtown Toronto in the summer of 2000, when he visited us for the annual conference of the Planners Network. And it was a protest about housing and gentrification. And in fact, my first sighting of Peter was, a bunch of us running away, including Peter, already in his 70s, running away from the police, that attacked that protest, so, so it's an image that has stayed in my head for a long time, and my second encounter with Peter was that, he was an evaluator for my tenure application, so it was my great fortune to be, evaluated by Peter. So I am in eternal debt, to Peter for the positive evaluation, I assume, that he gave. And in fact, I know it was positive because after my tenure evaluation, when he visited Toronto, he made the point to call me up, and I invited him over for dinner. We had a great conversation. I got to know him later, a few years later, at the great conference on the right to the city, organized in Berlin in 2008, in honor of his 80th birthday. Which and the proceedings from this were published in a special issue of the journal City, and also in a book edited by Peter Marcusa himself, Margit Meyer, and Neil Brenner, called Cities for People, right? And which also includes contributions from some people here, including Tom Angotti. So Peter, represented again to me, this great combination, of activism, the professional engagement, and the work of planning, as well as the intellect, that his father, among others, has represented so illustriously, in the world of critical theory, right? So, and I'm also happy to be part of this volume, because I think it, as Senem said earlier, it bridges not only various disciplines, and perspectives and so on, but it also bridges generations. So we have Peter from my older generation of teachers, and my own generation, and with people like Sinead, we can be very happy that this tradition of engaged critical scholarship is very much alive. And the tradition of critique, Peter brings into our world is in safe hands. So I'll leave you with that. Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Sinead, and thank you, Kanishka. for all your contributions and for your presentation. I want to move to the second section, and I want to invite Terry and Gideon from Carnegie Mellon University to present their work.
Thank you, Hossein and Sanem. Hi, everyone. We're really pleased to be here. We don't come from the disciplines of architecture or planning. We're actually in the School of Design at Carnegie Mellon. And so I'm going to do a brief overview of an approach that we've developed together at the Transition Design Institute called Transition Design. And then Gideon will join in the Q&A afterwards. Gideon, maybe just give everybody a quick hello. Let me just screen share. We designers have to have slides, you know. We can't help ourselves. Is that displaying okay, Hossein? Great. So transition design is essentially an approach for addressing complex, wicked problems, which we argue is a strategy for transitioning our organizations, communities, and even entire societies toward long-term futures that are more sustainable, equitable, and desirable. Most 21st century cities, as we know, face a variety of wicked problems such as poverty, lack of affordable housing and education, lack of access to healthy food and healthcare, systemic racism, gentrification, and as previously mentioned today, war, and many more. And we call these problems wicked because of their many complex characteristics. Every wicked problem is unique and constantly changing. There are multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas and no clear shared problem definition. These problems straddle organizational and disciplinary boundaries, and every wicked problem is connected to other wicked problems. And it's that last characteristic that makes them particularly intractable and resistant to resolution. We can think of wicked problems as rhizomatic, interconnected in complex ways beneath the surface of what's easily visible. So address any single wicked problem with a single solution and it's likely to fail. But this extreme interdependence also means that if we can successfully address a single wicked problem with multiple solutions at multiple levels of scale over multiple horizons of time, that can be a strategy for solving multiple wicked problems simultaneously and therefore begin to transition the entire system. We think of wicked problems as windows into larger socio-technical ecological systems that need to transition toward different futures. And in addressing that single wicked problem, the positive effects can ripple throughout the system, solving for multiple problems simultaneously, which in turn changes the entire system's transition trajectory. But to do this, we argue that we need to frame wicked problems within much larger contexts than we normally would, and banish the thought of single solutions to single problems. Transition design argues that wicked problems took a long time to become wicked and will take a long time to resolve. So we need to frame them within contexts that explain how they got to be wicked and that help us decide what we want to transition toward in the future. So first, we engage stakeholders in mapping the problem, which enables them to arrive at a shared understanding of its complexity, and it reveals zones of opportunity where systems interventions or solutions can solve for multiple issues simultaneously. Next, we map the relations between the stakeholder groups affected by the problem to identify relations of conflict, which are, of course, barriers to problem resolution, and areas of agreement that we argue are the low-hanging fruit in a system where work can begin immediately. Next, we expand the problem frame into the distant past to understand how the problem evolved over the course of multiple decades to become wicked. And this step requires the integration of both stakeholder perspectives as well as knowledge from a range of researchers and problem-specific experts. The systems map that emerges shows the historic roots of the problem, which can almost always reveal insights from the past that can inform solutions in the present. We next extend the problem frame into the distant future. And here, stakeholder groups co-create visions of long-term futures in which the problem has been resolved. This enables them to transcend their differences in the present and focus on a long-term future upon which they can agree, a future that's more sustainable, equitable, and desirable, hopefully. We next ask stakeholder groups to think rigorously and creatively about a decades-long transition from the problematic present to that desired long-term future. And in this step, they assess the present against their desired future to decide what to keep and what to leave behind. So we now have a problem frame that includes the past, the present, and the future. And we argue then and only then do we finally have enough information about the system's problem to intervene in an informed systemic way with ecologies of systems interventions. And these solution clusters act as steps along the transition pathway toward the desired long-term future. It's very akin to the concept of urban acupuncture, which has been around for quite some time. But it's important to emphasize that we don't see this as a linear approach, but rather a cyclical one, in which we're problem mapping, future visioning, and then system solutioning. And then we're waiting to see how the system responds to interventions. And this is something that I know we designers are not very good at, doing nothing, waiting, because time is money and quick results are what everybody wants. But we think that working in systems means working in different time horizons simultaneously and designing for emergence, and then dancing with the unpredictable results. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but I'll leave it there and look forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Can I invite Juliana for your contribution?
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be a part of this project. I'm Juliana Brunbaum, and I am a researcher and writer with a focus on eco-villages and permaculture. And I work outside of academia. So it was really an honor to be in the company of all of you. And my chapter was called Transition Pioneers, Cultural Currents and Social Movements of Our Time that Preveal the Future Post-Capitalist City. And I had fun inventing that word preveal for this, for this piece. And I define the post-capitalist city in permaculture-inspired terms. So a city that supports people, planet, and equal access to resources. And I affirm the city as a key location for systems redesign. And I feel like that's never been more obvious in the US, where I live, than now, where the President Biden's legislation around climate is being stalled on a national level, basically by one senator who's profiting immensely from coal. So the only real action happening right now in the United States around climate is in cities. And so I think that they're carrying a really heavy burden right now. And my chapter focused on those present day movements that show us what that future post-capitalist city might look like in 3 different sectors: food, energy, and housing. And in the food section, I talk about relocalization, talking about Cuba and its urban organoponico, which provides now half of the nation's produce. I talked about vertical and rooftop farms in Singapore and Hong Kong, New York City, in places like Detroit that were former manufacturing hubs, reclaiming decaying and abandoned lots in cities with farms. And then in energy, talking about micro and smart grids, collective district heating and cooling, and net zero architecture. And then the last section is about urban eco-villages, which are co-housing communities with a priority on regenerative design and shared use of resources. And I talked about a few case studies like Los Angeles, Eco Village, Ithaca in New York. And these places promote connection and social interaction at the same time as working on solving more sustainable use of energy, water, and land. And these days I'm working on a wonderful project that I wanted to share with you really quickly. It's a book edited by Paul Hawken called Regeneration. The foreword was written by Jane Goodall. And I'm currently working on this accompanying website, which is, I hope, will be a really rich resource for each of you. It goes through, it's focused on life-based solutions to and nature-based solutions to climate change, and goes through, it's beautifully designed here to show the interconnection between these solutions. So here we have nature-based solutions like bioregions, beavers, fire ecology, which is a big one here in California where I live, and then goes through agriculture, agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, education of girls and how that ties into a climate solution, and energy. And then here, I just wanted to open up one in cities, our topic today. This is one that I worked on called The Nature of Cities. And it talks about cities that are more green than gray, where buildings are clad in vines, landscape terraces and medians are sanctuaries for birds and pollinators, paved over creeks are restored, and many species long absent return to dwell in the parks, brooks, and forests. Urban trees and plants mitigate heat, which of course is more and more important with the intensifying heat waves, mitigate noise, flooding, another one that is coming up as more and more important with climate change, and pollution and stress, all while sequestering carbon and hosting life. And then the piece that we're working on now is called Nexus, where for each of these solutions, you can click on it and you can find actions that you can take as an individual, as a group like an urban planner, architect, real estate developer, investors, foundations, companies, and governments. So just wanted to share that resource that I've been working on and hope that's helpful to each of you. Thank you so much for including me in this project. It's been such an honor.
Thank you, Juliana. May I invite David, please? David, you are on mute. David, we don't hear you. Maybe you can stop sharing first.
Sorry about this. I do this 100 times a day and it's always a mess. Let me know if I can do it.
Yes, we see the slides and we can hear you.
Okay, there we go. So I'm sorry about this. So after 25 years dedicated to academia, public office, and a professional practice in my homeland, Venezuela, I lived through the failed, conflictive, and corrupt social revolution, leading to the largest outgoing migration in history of a country not at war, with the worst economic performance and social indicators. So when I was asked to be part of the book, I said, you really want me to be part of it? I really don't believe in the dichotomy between capitalism and socialism. And Senem and Hossein said, that's exactly what you want you in the book, since you operate in a middle ground with practical solutions. So see some of the ideas. Currently, over 1 billion people in the world live in self-constructed settlements. I never call them slums. And they have many positive aspects, but obviously they're very negative aspects as well. We estimate that this number will double in only 30 years worldwide. While I was national director of Venezuela in my country for many years, we enacted hundreds of urban plans assisting local governments, but we promptly realized that what we were doing did not address the needs of half the population. My tower was in the tower there, my office, and from there you could see the informal settlements of Caracas. And here's what got me thinking. In fact, we realized that conventional planning and urban design unintentionally works against the poorest segment of the population. Why? Because these plans transform rural land into urban land, ignite the real estate market, and most of these countries have a colonial past. Therefore, the land is in very few hands. Here you see an urban design dream, and then eventually the low-income communities are pushed out of the map exactly on the sites where our plan said that they should not be. Housing, yes, it's in all the charters, human rights. The thing is that in most developing countries, the demand of housing surpasses the supply, and clearly you can see here. Also, in these self-constructed settlements, as you see on the right, the homes become flexible, they grow, they adapt to family needs, they're living machines. That you never accomplish in the social housing. So, we went ahead and developed a whole series of interventions improving the self-constructed cities in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Colombia. La pièce de résistance, of course, is Medellin, and the impact is tremendous, operating almost in a delicate surgical way. Housing, again, it's not the problem in most developing countries, but the lack of what I call landscape or urban armature or support system. So, these ideas were reflected in this book, Planning and Design and Informal Settlements, and in a way, it's a combination between the dynamics, the benefits of the self-constructed city, of what people can do on their own, and assisting them in what they cannot achieve on their own with landscape urbanism techniques. So the approach avoids this capitalist socialist theoretical debate, and it focuses on criteria and practical solutions that can significantly improve the living conditions for almost 1/3 of the world population that we expect to live in the self-constructed city over the next 3 decades. It's rather a transitional approach toward a city that is predominantly built and managed by people. I don't want to bore you, but the main trick here is the assemblage of public land. Without the assemblage of public land as a priority, we cannot counteract the exclusionary effect of real estate-driven urbanism. It is an urbanism that is preemptive, you plan, and of course you accompany it, you assist in a transformative way. It is multi-scalar, it goes from the territorial to the site-specific. It deals with the morphological, with the aesthetic, but certainly with the performative aspects, providing water, better food, construction materials, and so on, stabilization of land, all those aspects that my colleagues have mentioned before. And of course, none of this thing cannot be done without working with the community and letting them take over as soon as possible the management, the design of their own territories. David Graham Shane always said, well, your theory, your ideas have to come down to the terrain and manifest themselves in morphological solutions. Well, this is my version of how we can organize these territories before they occupy the land and assisting the process with a support system of corridors, of mobility, of ecology, of water. The patches that you see here in dots indicates the land that is made available to facilitate the self-constructed processes, and the stewards usually are institutions that are beloved by the community that help guide the transformative process and secure the land for the changing demands. I don't want to bore you with this, but again, this is how these ideas apply in particular case studies. I will just finish with one of the ideas. We've ran at least 60 studios in Latin America in 20 countries, over 300 sites, working with local universities, with city halls, with experts For instance, this is a case study in Guatemala. The great thing about this site that we located is that we have informal settlements divided by one of the few large patches of public land, which is an underutilized agricultural school in Guatemala, separating them from middle classes. These two communities do not interact. There is a territorial vision. There's how we apply the concept, again, enhancing and protecting the ecologies, improving agricultural production, connecting societies to the public space that normally do not interact, or so favoring the organization of a framework for self-construction a la site and services, and so on. And then we go into the details of how we operate in the public space, how we organize lot organizations, homes, the lots with a basic bathroom or home units that can be expanded, and so on. So I guess those ideas are clear. So I would just by conclude saying that obviously the center of our activity has to be improving the quality of life and the health of these communities, make them productive, and a combination of morphological and performative aspects. And whatever we do, of course, we have to apply our ideas, our concepts, but there are no generic responses. They must be site specific. Thank you so much. And sorry for running through this and starting late with the technical complication.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. We can move to the third section, Cities Without Capitalism. And the first chapter is Tom Angotti's chapter. I would like to invite Tom.
Thank you. I'd like to start with a remembrance of Peter Marcusa. We both attended the Habitat International conference, the third conference in Istanbul. I think it was 1995. And characteristically, we were part of a delegation from the United States whose main argument was with the US delegation to the Habitat Conference. The United States was one of only 2 countries in the world to not support the right to housing. And also characteristically of Peter, we went to demonstrate against the Turkish government for displacing communities at the same time that it was hosting the Habitat Conference. And Peter was out there on the picket line with me. So, and Peter and I have been on many picket lines. We were, you know, a man of such great intellectual capacity and was also capable and anxiously involved in the struggles in New York City of those who are most affected by urban policies, from planners to the economic planners and the physical planners. Peter and I went to many meetings with the Right to the City Coalition, to many meetings with homeless, Picture the Homeless. We worked with them on efforts to force the city to provide decent housing to people who did not have housing. And that was Peter, a brilliant mind, but also a tremendous commitment to the change that he preached. I'll only say a few words about what I wrote about in the book. What would a non-capitalist city look like? I was asked to answer that question. And also characteristically for me, I started with a provocation. I'm not an architect or a designer. I'm an urban planner, and I got into urban planning through the civil rights movement and the fight against urban renewal in the United States. So I never thought that changing the form of cities would solve the fundamental inequalities within cities and among cities around the world. So when I address the question, what will a non-capitalist city look like? The first thing I have to say it's not about design and it's not about aesthetics. And this does not mean, of course, that design is irrelevant and that physical form is irrelevant. But it does mean that it has to start with the fundamental political question of social injustice and inequality at the city level, at the regional level, at the national and international level. The other thing that our professions have a proclivity towards is technological fixes. We like to have concrete devices to present to a public that is constantly reminded that you can't change the system, that we don't have the tools, that there are invisible forces that govern the creation of cities, and they're responsible for the problems. But we do need to reduce energy needs to combat climate change. That's the fundamental question facing humanity all across the board, urban and rural. And that does mean redesigning the way we live with land. And I think land is the fundamental question, not the city. What is the relationship between humans and land? And this has been abused by capitalism, capitalist growth. I support degrowth as the fundamental oppositional principle that we have to include in our formulas. The other thing that we tend to forget about is colonialism and slavery, because it's at those elements are at the very heart of capitalist growth on a global level and at the local level. And in the United States, which claims to not have colonies, except for maybe Puerto Rico and, you know, a few other islands scattered around the world, the colonial tradition of taking land, ripping it up, using it, throwing it away once the investors have made profit is deeply embedded with the way we look at our cities and how to develop cities. I guess finally, the other thing, provocative thing I try to pose in my chapter is we do need utopias because they play a very powerful political role in energizing people to develop alternatives. But one of the utopias we have to seek is slowness. That is, we as designers and planners always think of the spatial, but what about the temporal? The problem that we face is we're always looking for quick fixes. And so I'm a strong believer, this is my next book, in slow planning. That's based on a deep understanding of the corruption and the incapacity of capitalism to solve not just the urban question, the environmental question, the human questions, and that's where I think we need to go.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thank you. I'm just mindful of the time, so I would say that we have the last speaker of the day, Tarinski, and I hope just with a few minutes delay we can finish the presentations. We will be here for a short Q&A session after the presentation, but I appreciate that because the meeting was announced as 3 to 4, so maybe some of the participants cannot follow the meeting. So I will share my email address and Sanam's email address in the chat, and I would really appreciate it if participants who cannot join the Q&A session can send their questions to us, and we will be happy to share it with the chapter authors and respond to them soon. Thank you again, and I will invite Yavor for his contribution.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much both to Hussein and to Senem for inviting me to participate in this wonderful book. I have read it and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think they were very, very interesting and thought-provoking contributions. And from listening all the speakers here, I keep something from each contributor, and thank you very much all of you for that. My name is Yavor Tarinski. I come from the Balkans. I'm born and raised in an ex-socialist small Eastern European country called Bulgaria. But in the last decade and more, I'm living in Greece, still in the Balkans, just on the other side of the border of the Cold War. Bulgaria was poster child for a Stalinist type of socialism, while Greece was a Balkan poster child for a Western type of capitalism. So when I heard the title of the book, Cities Without Capitalism, I was really intrigued. I come from social ecologist background. So for me, the political aspect is very important. And I approach the importance of cities today in political terms. So in my chapter, what I try to tackle is a type of institutional framework, in the sense that what we need to move beyond capitalism is that we need to change the political architecture of cities, in the sense that we must move beyond oligarchic type of management, oligarchic in the ancient Greek sense, that is management of the few, and towards genuinely democratic in the sense of people power type of management. I think that in the quest for direct democracy, cities are crucial. Why? Because from their very inception, they gathered people together, not on the basis of blood ties or tribal belonging, but on political agreement. So cities were initially based on dialogue, on agreement, on deliberation. Unfortunately, nowadays, the things are radically different. Cities have come to be regarded as environmentally destructive, as a symbol of oligarchy, and as a powerful source material for capitalism. The very urban matter nowadays is a type of capital for big capitalism, and that's why we see large megapolises around the world exercising increasing influence over transnational politics, etc. But where I disagree with many on the autonomous, anarchist, left, etc. scene is that many have come to call for a type of retreat to an over-romanticized agricultural type of life. But I don't think that this is something that we need. I think we must reimagine in political terms our cities. Cities can function as federation of local citizen communes. They can function democratically and they can function sustainably. But what we need, and I agree with the previous speaker, what we need are not quick fixes. What we need are not technological tools. What we need are new political solutions that will move beyond bureaucracy. And as today we pay our respect to the memory of the great Peter Marcusa, I would like to read you a quote that deeply resonates with me. And it's a warning that he makes in a 2013 magazine if I'm not wrong, for a Vienna-based journal. And he writes, reimagining the city can be fun, it can be inspirational, it can show doctors that another world is possible, but there is a danger. Reimagining the city should not be seen as a current design project, laying out what the physical city could look like if we had our way, what utopia would look like. What the city needs is not redesign, but a reorganization, a change in who it serves, not how it serves those who now are served by it. So for me, this type of thinking is crucial. What for me, I would close here, but in concluding my chapter in the book also, I say that what we need is a grassroots approach. What we need is a grassroots movements that will push for such change, and that they will start implementing in the here and now the institutional framework of such democratic and ecological cities. And I'll remind you that in 2010, 2011, 12, we had the Arab Spring in many Arab cities, but we had also in the North America the Occupy movement. We had in Europe the so-called movement of the squares, where citizens go in the streets, and most importantly, they tried to reclaim the public squares of their cities and to introduce alternative institutions to the deeply corrupted parliaments. They introduced public assemblies, citizen councils, urban plenums. I think this is the approach. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking so much time, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Java. Thank you. Yes, it's done. Almost 4 years. Thank you very much for all contributions. Thank you. Thank you for everyone who joined today. And now it's time to receive your contributions if you have time. And if you can stay with us for a while. So please just turn on your mic and join with your comments or questions, please.
Can I break the ice?
Yes, please.
I mean, it was amazing. It was a beautiful session. I think that all the different comments come together and supplement each other. Tom, and the only thing that I do not agree is, I think that I agree that we do not need quick fixes. But if something the way I think, I act, and I teach is that we can't lose time. So it's not a quick fix that is just a patch. I think we need immediate, violently quick seeds that ignite sustainable change, that are focused on the people, that are focused in the environment, that are focused in the self-government. But we have to act very quick. There's no time to lose.
Thank you, David. I want to ask Nick.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I just think there were some really interesting debates there around the sort of cultural, historical, and political sort of debates around what we need to think about doing and how we influence that. So I think, and there's been obviously some references to recent political events and things that are going on. So I do think we can't rest on our laurels, understanding that a city is an organic sort of evolving device that moves along. So I think it's something that we really need to think about in relation to that, which is not just about planning, but it's about sort of cultural context. I just think some of the discussions around the different things around culture, politics, and history around different cities and different areas is really quite important for us to really consolidate and think about.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining as well. Oh, I just realized that Tom is off now. Sorry. Yeah, any other contribution?
Go on then, I'll raise another one.
Yes, Nick, please.
Yeah, I just think we're seeing it. I'm head of the School of Art and Design in a university that's in the middle of a city, do you think the discussions around, particularly around mental health, and about that sort of area around about people in populations and the struggling of that, and particularly after what's happened with what we've experienced with COVID, is something that you think we need to think about in relation to the city, to the support within the city, is something that we need to think about?
Yes. Anybody wants to join the discussion or answer the question? Yes, Terry, please. Yeah.
One of the things our approach tries to do is look at a particular wicked problem, such as, perhaps the negative psychological or social effects of the recent pandemic, as being connected to many other things. And I'm assuming there's so many educators on the call today, we've probably all been experiencing the toll that it's taken on our students and our faculty and staff. We just ran a workshop in our school using the transition design approach to have everybody map the problem. And one of the things that emerged stronger almost than anything else was the degree of mental and physical exhaustion that people were experiencing, and then the extra toll on the educators who were focusing so much on the students. So we are right in the middle of trying to make sense of all of this data that is completely about what you've just pointed out, Nick. So yeah, I think it's something we need to be turning our attention to right away.
Terry, I loved your presentation. And one aspect that I think is crucial that I like very much for it is, how to attend to these wicked problems. You bring in the stakeholders. And I imagine that everybody that is in this panel, the co-authors of the book and the viewers that are connected by Zoom, we have a better chance to communicating, to understanding what we're talking about than we have to communicate these ideas to the communities, to the politicians, and to those that are going to really make a difference. So I think that one of the challenges we have as intellectuals and academics is to change the chip of how we operate, knowing that if we don't get out of our bubble, our ideas are not going to go anywhere. So I really appreciated that was part of your process.
Yeah, thank you, David.
We need a new generation of facilitators that know how to take these ideas and work in the ground with the community, with the politicians, with the capitalist forces, and then we might make a difference.
Totally agree. And one of the things we try to talk about too is the different mindset that those of us working in this way need to take up. I know with designers, we sometimes can adopt this posture that doctors often adopt, where you're the expert delivering, your expertise to the system. And I think that needs to be reversed so that we're coming in service to the system, trying to facilitate the wisdom that's already in it.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned earlier, so we would be very happy to receive your questions, comments, critics after the meeting as well. It was really a great honor to see all of you today here. At the beginning of the road in 2018, when I talked to Porus, he proposed we come together, because that time we were all very close to New York City. Now we have so many members in California, and we are here in the UK. But so Porus suggested we come together in New York City and start the book with a conversation, actually, which unfortunately didn't happen, and I couldn't manage it. But today was the first time we all come together at the same time. So I hope we continue collaborating and collaborating with all the audience, all the people that joined us today, and all of us around the world. who are here or are not here, to be able to imagine and envision a future that we all deserve and our planet deserves, and our kids, our future generations deserve it. And I would like to thank everybody for all of your contributions and commitments. And thank you very much. Hope to see you again very soon.
And thank you, both the editors. You were wonderful.
Thank you. Bill.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kudos, Senem and Hossein.
Yes.
Thank you.
Kudos.
Thank you to you all.
Take care.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.